Click that again. Now folks can hear you.
Hello, everybody out there. This is Rita Bean. I know it says Kevin Connor, but I am not Kevin Connor, I promise. I'm Rita Bean, and I'm here to talk with you for a short time about this exciting pilot project that we're doing as part of the leadership team for the KtO initiative. And I'm hoping that the time that I spend with you today will be helpful to you in understanding a little more about what it is that we're asking you to do. Our goal really is to learn more about literacy instruction in your classrooms, but the purpose of the webinar today is to provide you with the information you need to complete the logs that we're asking you to do for a specific student on a given day. Right, so let's move to slide number 2. Whoops. Okay. The major focus, as I said, is to determine whether the directions and the items are easy for you to understand. That's our goal. We're interested in what you're doing in the classroom, but our primary goal this time is whether you can understand our directions and how we can improve what it is that we're doing with you. We want to be sure that we've created an instrument that can be used by lots of teachers. So be sure to do your best to describe what the target student is receiving in your classroom on a given day. No information that tracks you back to your school or district will be shared. We'll be developing a report, though, that summarizes what we've learned, and we'd be happy to share it with you personally. We hope that you will find this project to be an excellent learning opportunity. We know we're going to learn from it, and we see you as partners in this effort. We encourage you throughout the project to ask questions and make comments about the log content or any difficulties you experience with technology or wherever they occur. We will respond as quickly as we can. As you can see, please refer the content questions to me, and my email address is there, and any technology questions to Dave. My goal is to get back to you that same day, and I've actually set a schedule, at least for the first week, that will enable me to do that. I'm going to take some time each evening to respond to you, and no question is unfair. I really want you to ask as many questions as you have. And again, at the end of the project, you will receive a questionnaire that asks you to give us feedback about your experience with these logs. So what is this thing you're going to work with? What is the literacy logs? Well, basically, it's a survey of what's going on in your classroom, and you will see the same instrument each time you log in. We anticipate it will take you about 5 to 10 minutes per day, sometimes less, depending on what you're doing that day, but it may take you a little longer the first few days as you're getting accustomed to it. So, although it may seem long initially, you shouldn't really find it too difficult to complete, and I encourage you to hang with it. You'll be asked to check various boxes as you go through the logs. Some will address content. Are you teaching comprehension, fluency, vocabulary? Some will ask you about what the student is doing. Is he reading orally? Is she reading silently? And so forth. Some will ask you about what materials you're using, informational text, narrative text, and others will ask you about any activities that are going on, like is the child listening to you read, and so forth. So that's some of what you'll see on the log. And again, the purpose of this webinar specifically, I'm going to show you images of the log to familiarize you with the content, and I'll be highlighting some important points about specific items, how to complete the log. Right now we don't have a completed glossary, and some of what you do will help us develop a glossary that will help to explain some of the items that perhaps aren't very clear to you. I'm also going to take the time at the end to show you how I might code a lesson, just to give you an idea of what we're asking you to do. And again, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions during the webinar on the chat box, and I think they're making that available to you. So On Monday, actually you could begin tomorrow just to look at it, you'll receive an email link, and I plan to send a note out tomorrow so you actually could access your logs. You can't begin filling it out, but you could take a moment to look at it, and we're going to ask you then to click on the link, which brings you to your personalized log, and then you'll click on the correct date to fill out the log for that day. We're asking you to keep logs for 10 days from April 28th through May 9th. And don't worry if you don't have school on a specific day, because you actually will still be able to fill out the log. And the log will tell you randomly which of your 3 students is the target student for that date. So when you look at the log, you need to look at it in the morning so you actually can identify the student that you really need to think about for that given day. And as you recall, you've been asked to identify a student who reads above grade level, at grade level, and below grade level. Okay, so let's take a look at this special thing, the log. And here's the first page of it. This is what you'll see when you enter the site. You'll be asked to enter your first name, your last name, and your PPID. And essentially, we're asking for that so that we can keep the log secure. So only you can access it. And you will then, when you finish that, be able to submit and move on into the log.
Let's see this. Let's see the word.
So after you click submit, you'll see this page with dates. This is a sample. A group of us were testing the log out earlier this month, and you can see that this is Diane's log. And here you see the dates that she was asked to do the work to submit her logs. And you'll find the date that you are going to be working with. And then note the student, as I indicated. Is it a low test student, a high test student, so forth. And you'll notice that Diane on the 7th, for example, was asked to identify and think about the low test student. I hear that some people can't hear this, so for a minute we're going to stop and see if we can address the problem.
Gosh. Can I have an extra 3 minutes?
Yeah, you're working. That's fine.
It's graded. I don't know if I have enough.
Everybody having difficulty?
Do you want workroom today? Yeah.
That's all right. I can. It's all recorded anyway.
Why don't you take workroom?
All right, but wait a minute.
They're taking
You should have your mutes on. We're getting a lot of noise. And if you are on the webinar, you should have your mute on. Yeah, better. All right, we should have them do a show of hands or something. Do you want them to type in if they can't hear? Put that message in. So Carrie can't hear, Robin can't hear, Andy can't hear.
Carrie Lake. She's showing up as not in the call. Is it Carrie and Robin and Amy?
So please type in if you can hear. So there's a Robin Wilson. Carrie.
What?
Okay, that's the text. Sorry.
Should I go back, or?
When did they?
Well, the questions started coming in at Amy said at 2:35, but then they all started.
Okay.
Yeah,
Do you want to back up then?
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay. Do we have? I think you can start right there.
Okay.
But should I start now, or?
Oh, wait, no. Do we know that they can hear now?
Okay, we're
Yep.
testing audio, and Yeah, we don't have a way for you to raise your hand if you're hearing us.
So first
As
name,
Diane-
and yes or no.
As Diane asked before, could you please type your first name and yes? Thank you, Jennifer, for saying you can hear us. Do you want to type in the chat for Carrie to maybe leave the meeting and come back in? Since she can't. My guess is if you can't hear us, you're probably not also seeing Dr. Bean.
If you could start after the PPID, that's when it got difficult to hear, so that's good.
Okay.
Let's go back one more. No, it's the
No.
other way.
Yeah.
Right there,
So all of a sudden it just got difficult to hear,
I guess.
Jennifer.
Robin still can't.
How do you set it up so you can hear? We're working on this right now, so if you'll be patient, we're trying to see what we can do to make sure that everybody can hear. I think everybody should be able to hear. We were hearing someone's classroom noise. Okay. All right. I think that people can hear now. Is that what it seems as though? This is Rita again, and I'm going to move on. And if you have problems, please type a note. And I don't have access to those notes at the screen that I'm using, but Diane does, and she'll let me know, and then I'll try to stop. So right now we're on the teacher identification page, and all of the preliminary information was just prior to what you really need to do the log. So right now we're on the entry page, and again, I want to reassure you that this putting your name there is the same as your email. We want to keep it secure for you, and that's the reason we have asking for your first name, last name, and PPID. All right? So now we'll go to the next slide, and I'm hoping that this is working for us. And again, it's pretty self-explanatory. You'll just check the date. You'll see which student you should be focusing on for that date, and then you'll move on to the following page, right? And so here's the first real question that you get, question number 1. And in this case, we're asking you the total number of minutes that that particular student received that day. And you're to include all the routine times, such as morning board work, even the instruction that took place in another room or by another teacher. That's question 1. But question 2 is really important, because now we're asking you, of all that language arts time that you recorded in question 1, how much time were you either the teacher or an observer of the teacher teaching? So that's what you put in question 2. So in other words, this question number 2 is what you're going to use as you think about what that student received today. So if you had a student teacher, we'd ask you actually to be thinking about what that student got if you were in the classroom when that student teacher was teaching. And now comes question number 3. If you recorded 0 in either 1 or 2, what we want you to do here is just to indicate why the student didn't receive instruction from you. May have received it from someone else, but not from you. And so you see all the reasons there, like the student was absent or you were absent. I actually got an email from one of our teachers who are participating, and she wondered whether she could actually participate. Yeah, because she would fill out question 1, 2, and 3 and indicate that she was absent, and that would be it. So as you know, it wouldn't take her very long to complete the log for that particular day, and that's fine. That's fine. So now we'll move on then to the next page, and I'm not hearing from anyone, so I guess we're all right. And we're in a section that we call the gateway section, and question number 4 is an overall question that just asks you whether anyone else provided literacy instruction to the target teacher on that given day, and if target student on that given day, and if so, where. And so I think it's fairly easy to indicate that. And in question 5, this gets a little tougher, because now we want to know whether the student received instruction in a whole class setting, in small groups, with a peer, etc. So you'll need to record the number of minutes for each group size. And note, the computer will actually personalize this for you. So where you see where I have the red box and it says 10 minutes, you might have indicated in question 2 that you taught or observed that student for 60 minutes. Then what you would be doing would be indicating how the student spent that 60 minutes in whole class, small group, and so forth. Are we okay? Okay, all right. Okay, so we'll move on to the next page, and we're really talking now about question 6. And again, you have the personalized number of minutes. I put it in a red box for you, and what you're looking at is what the student, how much time the student spent in the 6 activities that we have listed in item 6. Now, this, the total number of minutes may not equal what you answered in question 2, because the student could be doing some activities that we don't have in that list of 6. They might be working in a workbook, or they might be doing computer activities and so forth. So don't worry if your number or total number of minutes do not add up to the total that you indicated in question 2. All right. So now we come to the next screen, and I want you to know that this is probably the most important screen that you're going to see today. This is really the gateway screen, because this particular screen determines where you're going to be sent when you finish this page. So let's take a look at it. So the first 3 items, comprehension, writing, and word analysis. If you mark any of those, then you will be sent to some other screens to do some more, determination of what it is you did in those 3 areas. If you mark any of the others, you will not be sent to any other screens. So it's the first screens where we're going to really get a little more in depth. But this is a very, very important page. And I want to spend a few minutes on the 4 possible answers to each one of these particular aspects of the language arts. Notice that they're major focus, minor focus, touched on briefly, or not taught at all. So let me explain each of those for you. So here they are. Not taught at all. You do have to mark it. If you don't mark it, you won't be sent on to any other page. Major focus means that it was the primary learning objective for the day. For example, you taught a guided reading lesson that focused on comprehension. That would be a major focus. And it could be new material. It can be review material that you spend a lot of time on. Minor focus means that a specific area was taught, but there was much less focus on it. So, for example, you might spend some time with fluency during the comprehension lesson. So you might ask each student to read a sentence or 2 out loud as they found answers to those questions you asked. That would be a minor focus. Or you might indicate that you touched on something briefly. That means that something may have come up in your lesson that seemed quite appropriate for that lesson. So maybe as students were reading text, they noticed some words that had specific Greek or Latin roots, and you took time to talk to students about how they could identify words using those particular roots. So that would be an example of touched on briefly. All right, now I'm going to go back to that page, item number 7. Oops, that shouldn't be that one. Something's missing. There it is. I'm going to this page of number 7, and it's to what extent were the following topics the focus of your work with the target student. I'm going back to it because I want to define 2 areas that I think might be confusing. So let's take a few minutes to talk about those. Vocabulary. You indicate that you worked on vocabulary only if it was a vocabulary lesson in isolation. So for example, you ask students to write words in sentences so that you understood that they really had a good understanding of that vocabulary. Or you work with students on using structural analysis to identify words. What you don't do is mark vocabulary if you're working with words at the same time that you're doing a comprehension lesson. You're working with a specific selection. So sometimes when you're going to do a guided reading lesson, you'll spend time with vocabulary before you go on to work with that selection or that text. Well, that would not be marked as vocabulary. You're going to find that in comprehension, and you should mark that as comprehension. I know that might be one that's a little tricky for you, and I may have some questions as we move on during the week, and that's fine. And maybe as we go through, you'll see some other examples. And then I wanted to define for you 7I. It calls the area is research strategies, and that really refers to working with the dictionary, working with the index or the glossary, or in fact interviewing, note-taking, things like that would be research strategies. Okay, I wanted to take a few minutes here to see if you had any questions about what we've talked about, and now I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that everybody heard this. Any questions at this time? Diane?
Yeah, there aren't any in the typing box. There's about 3 who can't hear because they don't have webcams or headsets. But everyone else who has a headset or a webcam can hear.
Okay, so lots of folks who, here's someone who wants a phone number to dial into the presentation. Diane's going to help me with that. And she says we don't have that capacity. You will be able to access this PowerPoint presentation with audio, and I'm not sure exactly when, but it should be soon after the presentation is finished. So we apologize for any technology problems. And Amy, I'm glad you can hear now. I just saw your note. Okay, so we'll move on then, and remember, if you identified that you taught comprehension writing or word analysis, you're going to be referred to some additional screens, and I'm going to show you some of those now. But you wouldn't necessarily see those screens every day, so you might be finished at this point too. We shall see. Okay, so here's the next slide. And this is the first page of the comprehension section. The first part is fairly easy. The first thing you will do is indicate whether you believe this is a listening comprehension or a reading comprehension lesson. And I've defined it for it. You use listening when the student does not have access to the text. For example, the teacher is doing a read aloud. Student doesn't have the text. But if you're reading and you have the big book in front of the student and the students can see the text, you would then mark that as a reading comprehension lesson. So that's the first big decision you make if you come to the comprehension page, if you indicated that you taught comprehension. All right. Now, this is a long section on comprehension, and it asks you which areas of comprehension the target student worked on that day. And you'll have 3 choices here. Either a specific area was a focus, or it was touched on briefly. And if you didn't teach it, you don't mark anything. You can actually go on and just leave it blank. So not all items will be marked in this section. And I've defined focus for you. Focus means sustained attention. You really spent some time on this particular aspect of comprehension. And touched on means that the student was engaged with that aspect for only a moment or two. So you just work your way through the list and indicate what you think what you were working with that student today. All right, now I'm going to the same page. We're not leaving that page because, again, I wanted to just define a few aspects for you. And here's where you really deal with vocabulary if it's taught in conjunction with a comprehension lesson, and it's A1C. Here's where you indicate that you worked on vocabulary, but it was related to the text that the student's going to read. All right? And one other definition at the very bottom, a written literature extension project would include things like asking students to write a new ending, create a poster, give a book talk, prepare to put on a play. All of these things are written literature extensions. So that's the comprehension. Now we're going to continue with comprehension, but this time, now we're moving to the kinds of materials that you're using in that classroom. So for many of us and many of you, I think this will be fairly self-explanatory. Initially, you have informational text, so you make a decision, is it that, or is it narrative? Now, narrative gets a little tricky, and I think some of this will relate most of all to our primary teachers, and we do have some of you in our project, because we're going to ask you whether you're working with a selection that has controlled vocabulary, and that would be A2B. That means that the words are generally phonetically regular, easy to sound out. Sometimes teachers use the terms decodable text, and that's what we're talking about when we talk about A2B. Cat sat on the mat. There was a frog on the log. Those are pretty simple, simplistic examples, but I think you can get the picture. Or are you using books that have repeated patterns or refrains, like those you would find in Brown Bear, Brown Bear? Then you would mark A2C. Other than that, you have standard text, and you choose either A2D or A2E, either a short selection or perhaps a chapter book. And I think most of our intermediate teachers will find themselves making a decision there between one of those two choices. I'm not going to spend any time on the next question, A3. It's pretty self-explanatory. It just asks you which of the following ways the target student demonstrated comprehension. So you see that at the bottom of that page. I hope you're still with me. All right, and on that last question about comprehension, it's fairly straightforward. We're asking you what you did, what your instruction was. And the note on the slide says, only mark a skill or strategy if you really demonstrated or explained it. It was explicit. So an example here would be that you did a think aloud about how to preview a text. Or you told students the importance of finding the main idea and went through how they might find the main idea themselves. So that's what you would do if you were marking these particular aspects of instruction. So that's comprehension. And I could take time for questions, or I can go through writing. That's the other area we're going to do, but I don't see any questions coming up. All right, so we'll go to the next page, and we're ready to tackle writing. And again, you will only be sent here if you indicated that you were doing writing on that given day. And you're going to be asked again whether you focused on certain areas of writing, and I've defined two of them for you that I thought maybe weren't quite clear. And one of them is B1C. Here it mentions, was the writing dealing with literary techniques or author's style? And what that means is that you focused on some aspect of style, like write a piece with similes or metaphors, write using words that show emotion, use dialogue in your writing, or even write using a specific structure. So that would be the focus on literary techniques. All right, and I want to mention B1E because I think that you'll probably be using that at times, because writing practice, B1E, deals with any writing activity that is general, not focusing on style, not focusing on specific forms. And you see the examples on your slide. Write in a journal, write a reflection, write about a field trip. So any of those would be general writing practice, B1E. Okay? And now we're on question B2. And in this case, we're asking whether what the target student's writing consisted of. So again, it's fairly simple. You just need to check whether the student wrote only words, like perhaps captions for a picture, or whether the student wrote separate sentences, complete sentences, but no paragraph, whether they wrote separate paragraphs, or really whether they were doing some sort of essay where they did connected paragraphs. Again, on B3, I'm not going to go over that because this is self-explanatory and asking about your instruction. Okay, now I'm going to stop here. This section on writing is followed by a word analysis section similar to what you saw for comprehension and writing. And if you did a lesson on word analysis, you would be sent to this section. But I'm not going to go through this section because it's very similar to what we just went through during this hour. And again, if you have questions about any of the items on it when you're doing it next week, please do feel free to send me a quick email. Any questions? We're getting close to the end, actually. I'm either doing a very good job or you're confused. No, I'm glad you're with me, and I hope you find this as exciting as I do. So, all right, so after you finish these sections, if you indeed have to do these sections at all, you'll find this page. Everybody will get this. And in this case, all we're asking you to do is check mark which sources influenced your lesson today. Were you influenced by lesson plans that you had used previously? Were you influenced by the curriculum materials that you had? Were you influenced by the Pennsylvania standards, the core curriculum, any of these things? And all you have to do is check it. We're interested in what affects your instruction, what helps you make a decision about what you're going to teach, right? That's followed with a few places where you do finally have to write to us, at least write a little bit. We first ask you whether anything unusual happened, and we know unusual things happen in school, whether it's a fire drill or the dentist came or a school assembly and so forth. So if you could let us know that. And then a really, really important question. We really want to know how long it took you to complete the log on that day. So do keep track of that. It's very important for us to know that. And then how difficult it was on that given day to decide which instructional items should be checked. And we've given you a ranking there: easy, somewhat difficult, or very difficult. And then feel free to write any other comments that you want about the log. And you can submit then at that time, because that's the end of the log. Notice, though, that you can also save and return later. And I talked with Dave this morning, who's our technology person, and he indicated you could save it for a couple hours, you could save it for a day, you can go back to it. Just don't submit it, save and return later. So you have that option. All right? So that's the log. and several of us in the instructional team, the leadership team, practiced doing this, and we found that it did take us between 5 to 10 minutes, but we're interested in how long it takes you, because you'll be really dealing with your lessons, and I know that many of the lessons that you do are complex and have many different dimensions in them. So what we're going to do now is look at a sample of a possible lesson, probably not as complex as yours might be, and then I'm going to show you how I might code it. Okay, so here we go. So here's a lesson, and I'd like to read it aloud to you, a sample of a 4th grade lesson. Mrs. S asks students to take out their workbooks and to write a meaningful sentence for each of the 5 vocabulary words. She also led students in a review of how to write such sentences. Then they wrote their sentences. Then Mrs. S had students read a story together, and the target student was in that group. She asked students to predict what the chapter will be about. As they read, she also asked questions such as this: what does that mean? Why do you think Tuck did that? Well, did she focus on comprehension, writing, or word analysis, vocabulary, fluency? Take a minute and either jot it down, what you think you would code as the gateway section. What are the big aspects of reading language arts that you would mark? Or talk to somebody if you're sitting with one of your colleagues. I'll just give you 30 seconds, and then I'll go on and give you the answers. Okay, let's go on and see what we have. Well, remember the gateway section, that's question 7, that's the biggie, and here's what I have. There are 3 major areas worked on in this lesson. Vocabulary, because it was in isolation, it wasn't tied to a text, and so that's a major focus, but I won't need to go to any other screen for that. And writing, that's a minor focus because it's used to accomplish the vocabulary goal. So that's for the first bullet. And also, as I'm doing question number 7, it's a major focus because I'm the teacher, Mrs. S, is working with a text and she's doing work with comprehension. So now I'm going to have to go to specific screens for both writing and for comprehension. Now what I'm going to do is just give you I think try to help you see how you would code some of the items related to content, and so I'll just focus on some of the key notions. So let's go to the first part of the lesson. Okay, so here's a sample of a lesson, and the sample of the same lesson, and the first part of it where they took out their workbook and they wrote a meaningful sentence, and then the teacher led the students in a review of how to write sentences. So this is what I'm coding when I get into the comprehension screens. I'm coding it as generation of ideas because the teacher actually led the students in a review of what to do in order to write those sentences. She helped them think about how to write the sentences. So that's generation. It was also writing practice. Remember, I told you about you're going to use writing practice if it's any kind of general writing. And then, of course, they weren't paragraphs. They weren't just single words. They were separate sentences. So I'm going to code it as B to B. So that's what you would do in terms of this first part of the lesson. Okay? So now we'll go to the second part of the lesson. And that's that comprehension section where she's having the students read the story together, and she asked the students to predict what the chapter will be about. And as they read, she asked questions such as this: what does that mean? Why do you think Tuck did that? All right, we had already coded that as comprehension, and she had students predict. It's pretty clear. It's right there in what I had written for you. So she had them predict. She had them answer questions where they made inferences. They weren't detailed questions. They weren't questions that were answered in the book. They were inference questions. So she's coding A1G. And right there in the sample that I gave you, they're reading chapter books. They're not reading short selections, so what the chapter will be about. And finally, the student, in order to demonstrate knowledge, answered brief oral questions. So that's the coding. So that's how I would code that particular lesson. So we are really on the last slide, and just reminding you that after you complete the final page, to please be sure to click Submit My Responses so that we don't lose it. And again, this webinar will be archived, and you'll be able to access it if you need reminders of the content of any of the items. Again, I want to thank you. I want to thank your district contacts also for encouraging you to volunteer. And I and the leadership team really want to encourage you to stay with us for the 10 days to see how it works out for you. You'll be making a huge contribution to our work and to helping us understand what our students are receiving in the classroom. Now, it's only 3:10, and so if you have any questions, we have a few minutes to take those right now. Someone's typing. Good.
Most people got it. Can we type the lesson plan? Can you see it?
Oh, yeah. Somebody's asking a question about whether you type a lesson plan and submit it. No, if that says that on that page, absolutely not. We don't want any lesson plans. All we want is for you to respond with the check marks. I'm looking to see where you might have thought you had to send a lesson plan. No, don't want any lesson plans. Thank you for that question, by the way. Any other questions? Diane, do we have any?
No, it doesn't look like it.
Well, I don't think we have any more questions. I know it's important to have wait time. I'm happy to wait for another minute or two. I thank you for putting up with any of the technology problems that you experienced. And as Diane is writing in her note, we will send the link to everybody, all of the teachers and the district contacts who are on my list, to this webinar, and also how to access the log itself. Thank you very much, and have a great evening. Thank you, Jennifer.